Hey guys, what's up? It's Kubi, bringing you guys episode number 1 of Heroes Fight Club. Thank you so much for you guys tuning in last week and all the feedback that I've gotten for the pilot episode. Most of what I heard was very much production based, which I understand. So I've gotten my new headset, or at least this is what Jake and I use when we broadcast through the studio. I've got an amp hooked up to it, so hopefully the popping is a little bit better. It's a much higher quality mic setup. So that should be a good bit better. In terms of the video, I had to convert the files last time, or change them over from different formats. That probably took some of the quality away. I'm in full screen now, and I've upped the graphics a little bit, and I don't think it ends up affecting too much of the frame rate. So that's good, kind of what I'm looking for. In terms of actual content, I'm going to try to shorten it up just a little bit. I think 35 minutes is a bit long for this type of show. I'm going to be shooting for something around 20 to 25 minutes. And otherwise, if you guys have any feedback, anything that you guys would like to see in these types of shows, let me know. Hit up my Twitter @TheKubi. Hopefully we'll be getting the YouTube channel off the ground very shortly. More news from that to come, but without further ado, let's head on into it. Okay, hopping on into it. As per tradition, I'm just going to go ahead and play the fight through so that you guys can try to formulate your own opinions on what ended up happening throughout this. Of course, we are looking at Blank over on the red side up against Galeforce Esports. This is during the Enter the Storm NA playoffs. This is, I believe, the first round, game number 2. Very, very close game this time compared to the previous episode. We have tied levels, kills are dead even throughout this fight. I ended up picking this fight because it kind of struck me as a really cool one. Although these teams are not really that well known, this fight itself highlights a lot of very high-level play, good teamwork, and I think there's only like 1 or 2 glaring mistakes that ended up going through towards the end of the fight. Otherwise, some really, really cool play, some different play styles, talent pickups for some of these heroes that we don't get to see too often, which I'll be going over in a little bit, and a lot of just very cool trading, positioning tweaks here and there that ended up being very, very impactful throughout the fight. Okay, so now that we've sort of gone through, we've looked at the team fight from both perspectives in just a general sense, we're going to focus a bit more on Blank's side and what the team wants to accomplish as a whole. Now, it's a very reactionary type of situation. Obviously their goal, since they've just picked up the Dragon Knight, is to get as much damage with it done as possible. They really want to take this down, if they can, safely to do it. They have a lot of HP on the Dragon Knight right now. They do need to be careful. Biceps is Jaina, so they need to make sure that the positioning on that is good. But really, they know that they're up against an ETC, a Johanna, who can set up for these types of positioning, so they're always going to be keeping their eyes on Mysticles and How, just to make sure that nobody is really getting caught out of position. If that's going to be the case, then they really want to make sure that either Aragi or Shot are in position to be able to move forward and cancel that out. Those are the only 2 stuns that are available for the team, that being Ma on Shot and Aragi basically through the Stormbolt. You can't even make use of Avatar because there's nothing that's going to allow him to walk through the mosh pit to get there. So if they can keep track of that, make sure that there is no flanks coming in from these types of positions here, which they've done a good job with. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then really they can just try to apply as much safe pressure as possible, take the keep out, and if they can dodge that big setup with the mosh pit and really make sure that everyone's spreading out through the chain bombs, they should have more DPS than the enemy team and therefore push back Galeforce Esports throughout this fight. And we're going to take a look at Biceps now to see his particular positioning throughout the fight. Okay, so we're going to shift focus on over to Biceps. We're going to watch the end of his stay on the Dragon Knight. Talk a little bit about positioning, because Biceps knows that he is the most DPS on his team, and he's going to really be the focus for the rest of the enemy team. So we're going to talk about this positioning right here, and how Biceps, when he understands what the enemy team's goal is at this point, really just all eyes onto Biceps, try to take him out as quickly as you can really make use of that, sort of play around the enemy team, and while you don't have any CC yourself, you can kind of control their movements. So Biceps immediately is going to be thinking, okay, I need to get to this position. If I see anything really threatening come out, throw the ice block, but otherwise back up as much as possible, get to a safe spot, and then really look for ways that I can dish out the most damage possible with my AoE. Now, keep in mind, Biceps really only has an effective cast radius of something like this with most of his abilities. So if he's sitting all the way back here, is not going to be getting the most out of them as he can. So he has to sort of toe this line between staying safe, dragging the enemy team sort of out of position, trying to overextend, killing Biceps, and also getting the most he can out of his DPS. So we'll advance this just a little bit so we can see what's happening. He does run to the space, but also sees that they're sort of bunched up a good bit. Gets actually pretty good value, hitting multiple people with his Blizzard. So that was pretty well done. Now, this moves on to the next topic, which is usage of the Water Elemental, which is kind of a tricky topic in general. He sort of throws it out, which is, at this point, we know is midway through the fight. But Biceps is actually, can't tell how long this fight is going to last and could go on for a while. Water Elemental has a fair duration to it, but casting it too early into a fight can really be detrimental because it's something you want to poke with it to get some DPS out of it as it does slow. It does do splash damage, but if it's too early, fight hasn't really initiated yet, you have to be careful in that if it gets bursted down to a long cooldown. It does make up a good chunk of your DPS. So I like the position that he's thrown it. It's sort of off to the side, but he can easily shift it to focus onto A, onto Hexo, or to Ball and Beast. I think all of these three are great targets. You want to kind of throw it onto that back line. Make sure you're either slowing them down, forcing them to spend some of their DPS to kill it, or in general just putting pressure on them to force their positioning just a little bit. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the timing. I think that this is in a good position, not too early, not too late throughout the team fight. So moving on to this, so he's going to end up getting some good damage out of this. You can see all of his abilities are off cooldown. There's no need to really stick his neck out. So he's got some very strong positioning. And as they're coming back up, he gets into a little bit of a scuffle with Ball and Beast. Not throwing too many abilities on him, but I like this timing for the Ice Block. In particular, I think it's pretty smart. So he's thrown this down here. But really what ends up being the big deal is that this hammering has just been thrown out from Ballin, right? And he knows that because he has Secret Weapon, he's got Power Throw, that's going to make up a huge chunk of his DPS. And if he's able to block this with Ice Block, it's really the only big threat. He knows that A has just used his Chain Bomb. That's going to be off cooldown. There's no big CCs that are coming. This is probably the best place that Biceps is going to get effectiveness out of his Ice Block. I think it's a really smart call here. Keep himself alive, force A to Falstad to sort of throw down his damage onto shot, sort of spread that around, because if you're able to distribute that damage, always a very, very good call. So nice Ice Block usage. We'll play the rest of this fight out. I think that there's some very good Bolt of the Storm usage. Biceps kind of sees that Mysticles is out of position just a bit. It really wants to kind of bait out that power slide as best he can. Almost gets away with it. Mysticles uses Bolt himself. Overall, though, very, very good positioning from Biceps. Keeps himself safe the entire time. Only once was he really in critical position, but Games was right there to heal him up. Gets, good value out of most of his abilities, hitting multiple targets with the AoE. Good timing for the Ice Block to dodge damage. Overall, very, very well played from Biceps. Okay, starting back at the beginning of this fight, next hero that I really want to put a lot of focus onto is Games Chess. And in particular, what Kharazim is capable of doing as a support, because this is a full support build, Kharazim with Protective Shield at 4. What is he capable of doing? Because there are times where it kind of feels like, alright, once I've thrown out my heal, and my Divine Palm has already been used, what is my purpose in fight? Do I kind of just sit around and just make sure that I'm not dying, waiting for my next CZ or ability to come off cooldown? And I'll show you that especially because he has gone Relentless at 13, Kharazim actually has a fairly reasonable health pool, quite a bit more than Agarra we can see at this point. So, and he's always going to be within range of your Breath of Heaven, because he's the center of that. He's going to get full charges for both shots because he has the Echo. So it makes a lot of sense for when you can soak up as much damage as possible. You have a lot of mobility. The Relentless is there. You're very likely not going to get CC down. So go ahead and advance this. You can see a little bit what he's doing to sort of get as much soak as possible. Before we even get to that point, I want to highlight the range of Divine Palm. You can see it here. It's very, very short. So he's kind of keeping himself in the front line, making sure that he's always going to be there. And I think that this is, very, very good position-wise. He's keeping himself right there. He's got that Divine Palm timing very much down. From here, the fight moving forward, he's already used his Protective Shield. So he wants to move in, pressure. He's going to end up taking one of the shots from the chain bomb, because Lamau knows if he's being a little bit too cheeky with how forward he is, he's going to have to back up to keep himself safe, hopefully to the rest of his team where he has to have everybody clumped up healing. Chain bomb will do his best to sort of take away that value, almost nullifying the healer with just one ability. So we're going to see Games Chess sort of go through this cycle, and I think it's quite interesting. He's going to end up moving forward. He puts pressure onto the heroes wherever he can, because he does do decent damage regardless. A is going to throw this chain bomb down onto him, hit this target, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to see Games Chess is going to back up to the rest of his team. And really, it's about this positioning in this back line, dodging the rest of his teammates for the duration while the chain bomb is out, while also making sure to get full effectiveness through that Breath of Heaven. I think he actually does a very, very good job getting the full use out of this. And we'll see a couple examples of this as it goes forward. So we already have that Divine. Palm popped, did a very good job with that. Gets tagged with that chain bomb, backs up, only hits Aragi, not really a huge deal. Gets good value out of the rest of his heals at this point forward. Moving forward, and then says, okay, cooldowns are off, I'm going to dash back in, soaks up another chain bomb, gets well out of the way of the rest of his team, and then continues to move forward, applying pressure. So I think Games Chess is really doing a great job towing that line between being a support, soaking up as much damage as possible, making great use of that heroic. Overall, didn't overextend, didn't get taken out, kept all of his allies alive for the most part throughout this fight. So I think this is very, very good example of how to play, Kharazim as that full support style. Auto attack style, completely different thing. I'll probably cover that in another video, as I think it is very interesting, especially in the draft. But overall, I have to say, very well, good job done for Games Chess here. Okay, next hero that we're going to look for is Agarra on the side for blank. And really the big thing that I want to talk about, and I think this is honestly, it's such a small thing that can get overlooked, but it's the placement of these two creep tumors. And he just threw them down just before the fight. And we haven't talked too much about the goals yet for Galeforce in terms of what they want to get done during the team fight, but it's something you can analyze when you're on the side of blank. What do they want to do? It's going to revolve mostly around that mosh pit and how they can land it. And one of the biggest threats to this, and now they have good vision of Ballin for right now, but if he's able to slip out and sort of sneak around this top position, that could be a huge threat, pinning the rest of blank up against this wall. If we see a very, very good Mighty Gust that's thrown here, pins him to the wall, it's 5 seconds of slow afterwards. It's going to set up so well for Mysticles to go in and get a very, very good mosh pit. So I think this is just so critical that this vision is placed in this upper area just to cover that complete flank. That's probably the most important thing that could have been done during this team fight for Shot. Now the rest of it is really going to revolve around Maw placement. That's always going to be a big deal for Agarra, and really just safe damage output. We're going to see a continual spacing from Shot as he plays through this fight, and he's really just sort of keeping this range between him and his enemies the whole time. As we advance through this fight, you'll see this spacing is very, very consistent from Shot, always getting a lot of damage. He throws down these Hydras onto great targets. He has 2 charges of it based on his build, but he throws one onto A and one onto Mysticles, and I don't think it's a bad idea to throw it onto tanks, because it really does force their position. It forces them to back up, forces some of the damage dealers on their team to spend abilities on taking those out, or if you throw it onto DPS, like one gets onto A in this case, it just sort of forces him to back up in general. And it does a lot to control positioning that doesn't really get highlighted too much. So go ahead and advance this just a little bit. We can see both of these Hydras thrown out, and immediately there's some heroes on the side for blank that get in trouble. And I think that this position for the Maw, although it's not really going to land a huge wombo for the rest of the team, other than Jaina, it's not really going to be a huge amount of damage. It's okay to throw down Maws that are defensive in nature. And it doesn't always have to be like this huge game-breaking thing. If you can save teammates with it, obviously there's a few that are in big trouble. If Biceps gets bursted down really quick and stunned afterwards, that could be a problem. He is Jaina, not a huge amount of escapes or just HP pool in general. He does have Bolt and Ice Block, but if he doesn't get the chance to use them, that could be scary. That the Palm's already going off, so I think that this is a great spot to use Maw to help the rest of the team sort of regroup, position, maybe get a little bit of extra damage out of it. So I think this is very, very well placed. And then really for the rest of the fight, just sort of keep an eye on the positioning for Shot this entire time. He's always keeping this very safe positioning. He does have Bolt, you know, if things start to go south really quickly. But this is the best that you can get out of Agarra in these cases. Have that vision for the flank, consistent auto attack damage, zone with Hydras, placing good Maws. And overall throughout this fight, it's these examples that shows, like, you know, not overextending in any way. Very well done. Okay, we're going to go back to the start of this fight once more. We're going to take a look at things from the perspective of Galeforce and what they want to accomplish throughout the fight. Of course, the star of this is going to be Mysticles. He knows for the rest of the team, they need to defend this keep at all costs. Biceps with this Dragon Knight is going to be a big threat, so they need to land a big mosh pit, I think, at this point. A lot of capability from the enemy team to take this keep out. So a mosh pit through the help, you know, the support of these two heroes here, Falstad and Johanna. They have a good bit of CC and control, whether that be Falstad flying around here to get a decent Mighty Gust to pin heroes to the wall, whether How moves forward into this position, you know, to throw out a Condemn. There's a lot of different ways to slow and CC the team that Blank needs to be careful of, and I think that they have this goal in mind. They're sort of waiting for an overextension, and throughout that we'll see how some of the smaller decisions sort of between Ballin and Mysticles play out to get some good effectiveness from this mosh pit and moving forward. Put a little bit more focus on him and some of the decisions that he makes throughout this fight. The first thing that we're going to see is him setting up for this mosh, and he knows that especially if he's got the back, or How has his back with a little bit more control, if he dashes forward and gets someone out of position, like in this case, How is there immediately to follow up with the Condemn, with the Blessed Shield to set up to make sure that he's catching at least 2 targets in this this mosh pit. He goes forward, that Blessed Shield does get thrown out. Some good body blocking does set up for this great mosh pit. And I think that I really want to highlight with this, it's okay to catch just a couple heroes in these moshes. You're basically taking out the Dragon Knight. There's plenty of DPS here, plenty of AoE with the Phoenix being thrown down. Ballin with the Hammerang is going to get a lot of damage done. So I think it's fine just to catch these 2 targets out. You still have a lot of HP, and you're going to at least force out the Divine Palm. I think all of those things you can consider that a win. So your mosh pits, when you're playing with your team, you don't always have to land the sickest mosh pits. It's just really making sure that you can get a couple heroes out of it. Even just the threat of the mosh pit sometimes is enough to really manipulate the enemy team's movement enough to make sure that you're getting a favorable exchange out of everything. So I think that this was very well played. Not the flashiest of mosh pits, but it really gets the job done and didn't overextend trying to get it in the first place. So gets this done. Let me just try to swap that vision back over. All right. Gets this mosh pit done. Ends up baiting out this Divine Palm. Gets stuck in this maw. Doesn't really see too much consequence out of it. Now, the positioning for the rest of this fight has a lot to do with some of the talents that he's picked up. And we haven't really talked too much about talents just yet. The big ones that I want to highlight for ETC, Prog Rock. Every regen globe that he picks up throughout the game is going to increase his healing on guitar solo, which ends up being quite a bit. And the other is Echo Pedal. I would talk a little bit more about groupies, but he honestly isn't next to his team a whole lot. He gets a couple triggers of it, but basically no matter who is standing around him, he's getting some value through casting his abilities. And Echo Pedal, not one that is picked up a whole lot. Oftentimes we do see the movement speed increase, maybe Stone Skin, something to keep him alive a little bit longer. But this talent did work in this fight. Right now he's sitting at 26k. I think when the fight starts he's actually sitting around 23k hero damage. And just keep an eye on his positioning throughout the rest of this fight, and that he's always looking to keep heroes near him to get as much as he can out of it, just for his positioning. So he's getting a lot of healing for the rest of his team through Malfurion as well, and through his ability through the Prog Rock. But he's always casting his abilities, and there's multiple heroes nearby all the time. You can see those pulses getting thrown out. So just doing a very good job. We talked a lot about warrior positioning in the last one, so I won't rehash that too much. But I did want to really highlight how much value he's getting out of this Echo Pedal. And since Mosh Pit has already been used at this point, he knows that he can basically just push his HP to the limit, stay in, get as much damage in from the rest of his team. And if we look at his damage numbers at the end of this, 33k. If he started at 23, he's getting, you know, an extra 50% damage throughout the entire game. So if there's arguments whether Echo Petal is just used as a split push ability, if you know what you're doing in these team fights and can really push your positioning to the edge, like Mysticles is doing here, knowing that he has Bolt and didn't need to use it to set up for a mosh pit since it had already been used, that's just very strong. And really just pushing the hero to the limit. A good warrior is one that's always going to be able to get as much damage as possible out of their builds to make up for whatever pressure their range damage is going to be taking. Alright, and for the last hero that I want to cover, back at the start of the replay once more, and that is on Ball and Beast. He's playing Falstad in this case, and he has gone for that auto attack style build, so Power Throw at 4, Secret Weapon at 7 to really maximize any kind of auto attack damage. With Nexus Frenzy now on the table, he can keep his positioning quite a bit safer. So you can kind of keep an eye on his hammerang tosses throughout when he's saving it, and sort of his general positioning throughout the fight, positioning himself on the side, just to really put pressure onto that back line whenever he can with that range. But the big thing that I want to highlight is the use of his Mighty Gust, and I think it's very smart and not a way that we see it used too often, but really should see it more. And we'll see the setup for it. We've seen this a couple times now. Mysticles moving forward, and with the help of How, sets up for a pretty good mosh pit, but really the big deal is Ballin and his ability to kind of throw out this position for this Mighty Gust at this point. Remember, there's a 5-second slow immediately after. Right, we talked about the potential for this flank a couple times already, but he's respecting Shot's vision and knows that that's really just going to kind of put him in a weird position. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to move for a flank in this area if they have vision of you, because there's not really a great safe position to retreat to. I think it's maybe asking a little bit too much to try to move here and then dash over this wall to get to safety with barrel roll. If you get stunned out of it, there's a lot of risk factors, so you probably would end up having to retreat in this position, taking you really far away from the fight. So I think it's okay. It's a great call to kind of just save the Mighty Gust to control the rest of the heroes that don't get caught in. And the big important one that you end up catching, or Ball and Beast catches in this fight, is Aragi and Shot. Like, these two heroes, really, really important to catch them because they have the two stuns that are going to control this mosh pit, whether that be Ma or Aragi's Stormbolt. And just controlling those two, keeping them out of the fight, ensures that there's going to be a lot of good value out of this Mighty Gust. And also, on top of that, and we'll advance this replay a little bit, is able to push them out, get that good value. But on top of that, it's a really, really short cooldown. I think a lot of people don't realize this. Even if you're only controlling one or two heroes with this Mighty Gust, you're going to get good value out of it, and it doesn't always have to be the great disengage or the massive setup, much like what we saw for the mosh pit. It's just a really good control, keep a couple of heroes out. They spent one heroic, pulled out that Divine Palm, which is going to be a big deal, and you'll see that he ends up getting to use the Mighty Gust again in this fight. So kind of like what we see for Phoenix, it's being used multiple times. And he's basically waiting for the one time where he can disengage the fight, but if he can do it, add an advantage for his team. Aragi ends up stepping a little bit too far forward, thinking that he probably had a takedown onto Johanna. They have a one-hero advantage. They know they can disengage from the rest of the team. Use that Mighty Gust one more time. Just really, really smart play. Using it early in the fight to ensure a very, very good mosh pit, and then using it to disengage afterwards. If the play is high enough level, you're going to have these long fights where there's a lot of positioning changes throughout it, and you can ensure that you probably will, especially at these high levels, get multiple Mighty Gusts per fight. So very, very good job to Ball and Beast. Like I said, this team fight, there was not a lot of mistakes. Really, it's just Aragi having leapt forward, thinking that he might be able to get the takedown into Johanna. Maybe he just didn't take into account the indestructible that was going to be popping. Otherwise, the only death, just a lot of really, really cool play back and forth from either side. So I think this is a great example of some good play on the NA server that's happening right now. Probably going to look to try to cover some EU games in a little bit, although I don't always have time to watch them. If you guys have some fights that you think were pretty good in terms of what you were watching, I'm also going to be looking to cover some of you guys' games as well. If you have something that you want to send in, I'll let you guys know when I'm looking to do one of those episodes in the near future. Other than that, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next week.